The transport shuttle's doors hissed open, and Riley Santos stepped onto the polished metal floor of Orbital Station Gamma 7. Her single duffel bag felt light in her hand as she looked up at the vaulted ceiling stretching 5 stories above her head. Everything here was built for giants. Around her, other new cadets moved through the arrival bay. A massive Drachni warrior walked past, his scaled shoulders nearly brushing the doorframe that Riley could have walked under without ducking. His footsteps boomed against the floor. 3 thorough soldiers stood in a cluster near the assignment board, their armored hides gleaming under the station lights. Each one stood at least 7 feet tall. Riley pulled her assignment chip from her pocket and headed toward the registration desk. She noticed several heads turning as she passed. Whispers followed her. Is that a human? From Earth? The garden world? She looks like a child. The registration officer, a thin Mindari with pale blue skin and enormous dark eyes, looked down at Riley from behind the desk. The officer's expression shifted from professional to confused. Can I help you find someone? The officer asked. Are you looking for a family member? I'm here to register, Riley said, holding up her assignment chip. Cadet Riley Santos, Security Coalition Academy. The officer's eyes widened. She took the chip and scanned it 3 times as if expecting the data to change. When it didn't, she made a small humming sound that Riley couldn't interpret. This must be... Well? Yes. Your identification checks out. The officer handed back the chip along with a data pad. Barracks Assignment 7C. Your orientation begins in 2 hours. Welcome to the Coalition Academy. Riley took the pad and nodded her thanks. As she turned away, she heard the officer murmur something to a colleague. Both of them stared at her as she walked toward the barracks corridor. The hallway stretched ahead of her, lined with doors marked with alien symbols she was still learning to read. She found 7C and pressed her palm to the entry panel. The door slid open to reveal a long room with 12 beds arranged along both walls. Most of the beds already had gear stacked beside them. A few cadets were inside. They stopped their conversations when Riley entered. One of them, a Drachni with deep red scales and a scarred snout, stood up from his bed. He was enormous, easily 8 feet tall with shoulders as wide as Riley was tall. He looked down at her and then burst into laughter. By the void, they're really letting anyone in now, he said. His voice rumbled like distant thunder. What are you, a maintenance worker's kid? You lost? I'm Cadet Santos, Riley said calmly. She walked to the only empty bed and set down her duffel bag. The Drachni's laughter grew louder. You a cadet? Look at you. My little sister is bigger than you and she's still in youth training. 2 other cadets joined in the laughter. Atheros leaned against the wall, his expression more curious than mocking, but he didn't speak up to defend her. What's your name? Riley asked the Drachni. Halvor, he said, puffing out his chest. Son of General Halvor the Destroyer. My family has served in the Coalition for 6 generations. And you? What makes a little human think she can survive even 1 day here? Riley began unpacking her bag. She laid out her standard issue gear with careful precision. I'm here for the same reason you are. To train, to serve. Halvor stepped closer. He towered over her, his shadow swallowing her completely. This isn't some soft Earth school, little human. This is the Coalition Academy. We train the galaxy's warriors here. The elite. The strongest. You'll be broken by the end of the first week. Maybe, Riley said. She didn't look up at him. She continued organizing her gear. Another cadet entered the barracks, a female Mindari with elegant features and silver markings along her temples. Her eyes swept across the room and lingered on Riley for a moment longer than the others. Something flickered across her face, but she said nothing. She moved to her own bed in silence. Halvor snorted. I'll make you a deal, human. When you quit and wash out, you have to publicly admit that humans don't belong in the Coalition. Agree? Riley finally looked up at him. She was so small compared to him that she had to crane her neck back to meet his eyes. But her gaze was steady and calm. I won't quit, she said simply. The barracks erupted in laughter again. Even the quiet Thuros chuckled. They all say that, Halvor roared. Every weak species that comes here thinks they're special. Then they meet Commander Break. Then they face the training. Then they break. Riley turned back to her unpacking. I guess we'll see. 2 hours later, all the new cadets assembled in the main training hall. Riley stood in formation with 43 other recruits. She was the smallest by far. The cadet next to her, a Thuros, could have stepped on her without noticing. The hall's main doors crashed open. Commander Breck entered like a storm. He was a drachni older than Halvor, with scales that had faded to a dull gray. Scars crossed his face and arms in thick white lines. He was missing 3 fingers on his left hand. His eyes swept across the formation with the cold assessment of someone who had seen 1,000 recruits and buried half of them. "I am Commander Breck," he said. His voice carried easily across the massive hall. "For the next 6 months I will attempt to turn you into coalition soldiers. Most of you will fail. Many of you will quit. Some of you will require medical evacuation." He began walking down the line, inspecting each cadet. When he reached Riley, he stopped. He stared down at her for a long moment. "Human," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir," Riley replied. Breck circled her slowly like a predator examining prey. The entire formation watched in silence. "I have trained warriors from 63 species," Breck said. "I have never trained a human. I know nothing about your people except that your world is classified as low threat, and your species has no notable physical advantages." He stopped in front of her again. "I will offer you one chance. Cadet Santos, you may withdraw now with no mark against your record. You may return to Earth and tell them you tried. This is not cowardice. This is wisdom. You are not built for this." Riley kept her eyes forward. "Thank you, sir. I respectfully decline." Breck's scarred face showed no emotion. "Very well. When you break, do not say I didn't warn you." He moved on down the line. Behind Riley, she heard Halvor whisper to another cadet. 3 days. I give her 3 days before she's crying and begging to leave. I say 2 days. The other cadet whispered back. Riley said nothing. She kept her eyes forward and her jaw set. Her hands clasped behind her back didn't shake. She had come too far to quit now. She had fought too hard to earn this spot. They could laugh all they wanted. She had been underestimated her whole life. Growing up on a remote cattle station in the Australian outback, the youngest of 5 children, the smallest kid in every school she attended. People always thought she would break. They always bet against her she was still here. She was always still here. That was the only thing that mattered. As the formation was dismissed and the cadets headed toward their first training exercise, Riley noticed the Mindari cadet from her barracks watching her again. The woman's expression was thoughtful, almost concerned, but Riley didn't have time to wonder about it. She had training to survive. Riley's muscles screamed as she pulled herself up the climbing wall for what felt like the 100th time. Her fingers were raw and bleeding. The wall stretched 30 meters above the training floor, and every grip was designed for hands twice the size of hers. She had to stretch fully between each hold, her small frame working twice as hard to cover the same distance the larger cadets managed with ease. Below her, Halvor had already finished. He stood at the base with his arms crossed, watching her struggle. 10 other cadets had completed the climb and moved on to the next station. Riley was dead last, as she had been in every exercise today. Her left hand slipped. For a terrifying moment she dangled by 3 fingers, her boots scraping against the smooth wall. Pain shot through her shoulder. She gritted her teeth and swung her body, catching another grip with her right hand. Slowly, painfully, she pulled herself up and continued climbing. When she finally reached the top and hit the completion button, the time display showed she had taken 3 times longer than Halvor. She rappelled down and landed on shaking legs. "Pathetic," Halvor said as she passed him. "My grandmother could climb faster than that." Riley didn't respond. She just moved to the next station, a weighted carry across an obstacle course. The standard weight was 50 kilograms. For her body size, that was proportionally crushing. The drachni carried the same weight as if it were nothing. She hoisted the weight onto her shoulders. Her knees nearly buckled. She took one step, then another. The obstacle course stretched ahead of her. Crawl tubes, balance beams, wall climbs, all while carrying the weight. Commander Breck stood near the course entrance. He watched her approach with his cold, evaluating gaze. "You're falling behind, Santos," he said. "At this rate, you'll be here until midnight finishing the day's exercises." "Yes, sir," Riley gasped. She didn't slow down. "I'm offering again. You can withdraw. This is only day 1. "No, sir." Breck made a noise that might have been approval or disgust. Riley couldn't tell. She entered the course and began the brutal sequence of obstacles. By the time she finished all the day's stations, the suns had set outside the station's viewports. The training hall was nearly empty. Most cadets had finished hours ago and gone to eat dinner. A few stragglers remained, including the quiet Thuros from her barracks and the Mindari woman who kept watching her. Riley completed the final exercise, a sprint while wearing a weighted vest, and collapsed onto her hands and knees. Her vision swam. Her entire body shook with exhaustion. "Time," announced the automated training system. Cadet Santos. "Day 1 complete. Rank 44th out of 44 cadets." She heard laughter from across the hall. Halvor sat with a group of other Drachni cadets pointing at her. Riley pushed herself to her feet. Her legs wobbled but held. She walked toward the exit, forcing each step to be steady. She would not limp. She would not show how much it hurt. In the barracks that night, she soaked her bleeding hands in the cleaning station. The Mindari woman approached her. Up close, Riley could see the intricate silver patterns that marked her temples and cheekbones. "I'm Lissa," the woman said. Her voice was soft, almost musical. "I wanted to. Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Riley said. Her hands told a different story. Lisa hesitated. "I'm a Mindari. We're naturally empathic. I can sense feelings and intentions from others. It's part of our species' gift." "Okay," Riley said, not sure where this was going. "I sense something from you that I don't understand," Lisa continued. "Everyone else here, I can feel their doubt, their fear of failing, their worry about the pain. But from you," she shook her head slowly, "it's like there's no stop mechanism in your mind. You just keep going forward. I've never felt anything like it." Riley wrapped her hands in medical bandages. "I'm just doing the training." "No," Lisa said firmly. "You're doing something else. Something different." She paused. "The others think you'll quit. But I don't think you can quit. I don't think it's in you to quit." Before Riley could respond, Halvor's voice boomed across the barracks. "The little human is making friends. How sweet. Maybe Lissa can hold your hand during tomorrow's exercises." The other Drachni laughed. Even some of the other species joined in. Riley climbed into her bed without responding. Her whole body was a map of pain. She had pushed harder today than she had ever pushed in her life, and tomorrow she knew would be worse. The next morning came brutally early. Riley's body had stiffened overnight. Every movement sent fresh waves of pain through her muscles. She forced herself out of bed anyway. The day's training was worse than the first. Commander Breck introduced combat simulations, full contact sparring with safety gear but no holding back. Riley was paired against Grant, the quiet Thuros from her barracks. Grant stood 7 feet tall with thick armored hide covering his body. Riley barely came up to his chest. "I will try not to hurt you too badly," Grant said. His voice was surprisingly gentle. "Don't hold back," Riley said. She raised her fists. The match lasted 8 seconds. Grant moved with surprising speed for his size, feinted left, and swept Riley's legs. She hit the mat hard enough to knock the wind from her lungs. The impact sent shockwaves of pain through her already battered body. "Match to Grant," the referee announced. Riley stood up. Again, they fought again. This time, Riley lasted 12 seconds before Grant pinned her. She got up. Again. After the 5th match, Grant stopped. "Cadet Santos, you need medical attention. I can feel your ribs bruising through your safety gear." "Again," Riley said. Grant looked toward the referee, uncertain. Commander Breck had been watching. He approached the sparring circle. "Santos, you've lost 5 matches. Take your defeat and move to the next station." "I want to go again, sir." Breck's scarred face showed the first hint of expression since training began. His eyes narrowed. "Why, you cannot win." "Grant outweighs you by 100 kilograms. He's armored. You're not. This is not training at this point. This is just punishment." Riley wiped blood from her lip. One of her eyes was swelling shut. "I need to learn how to fight someone bigger than me. Everyone here is bigger than me. So I need to keep trying until I figure it out." Silence fell across the training hall. Other cadets had stopped their own exercises to watch. Breck studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Grunt, continue the exercise." They fought 15 more times. Riley lost every single match, but each time she lasted a little longer. She started reading Grant's movements, started understanding how to use her smaller size to slip under his guard. By the 20th match, she managed to land an actual strike before he took her down. When the exercise finally ended, Riley could barely stand. Grant helped her to her feet. "You are very stubborn," Grant said. "Yes," Riley agreed. That night, she didn't make it to dinner. She went straight to medical for treatment. The doctor, a spindly alien with too many joints in its arms, scanned her with obvious concern. Multiple contusions, severe muscle strain, bone bruising. You need at least 3 days of rest. Can you fix me enough to train tomorrow? Riley asked. The doctor made a clicking sound. Technically, yes, but I don't recommend it. Your body needs recovery time. Fix me for tomorrow, please. The doctor administered treatments that numbed the worst of the pain and accelerated her healing slightly. It wasn't enough to fully recover, but it would get her through another day. When Riley returned to the barracks, most cadets were already asleep. But Lissa was still awake, sitting on her bed with a data pad. She looked up as Riley entered. The betting pool on when you'll quit is up to 200 credits, Lissa said quietly. Good, Riley said. She lowered herself carefully onto her bed. Every movement was agony. Someone's going to lose a lot of money. In his private office, Commander Breck reviewed the day's training data. His assistant, a young Drachni, stood nearby. Sir, about the human cadet, the assistant began. Is there a point where we intervene? She's taking a lot of damage. Breck pulled up Riley's medical file on his screen. Then he pulled up her performance data. Dead last in every single exercise. But her completion rate was 100%. She's completed every assigned task, Breck said slowly. Yes, sir, but she's last in every ranking. Breck was quiet for a moment. Then he accessed the Coalition database and searched for information on Earth. Human history, human biology, human psychology. What he found made him lean back in his chair. Humans were persistence hunters. Before they developed weapons, they chased prey for days until the animal collapsed from exhaustion. They had more endurance than almost any other species on their planet. They could keep going when their bodies screamed at them to stop. Breck read about human history. About soldiers who kept fighting with mortal wounds. About explorers who crawled through impossible conditions. About a species that never seemed to know when they were beaten. Interesting, he muttered. Sir? The assistant asked. Nothing. Dismissed. Alone in his office, Breck stared at Riley's file. Then he made a note. Monitor closely. The human may break, or she may surprise us all. 3 weeks into training, Commander Breck announced Hell Week. Riley stood in formation with the other cadets, her body still covered in bruises from the regular training. She had moved up from last place to 38th out of 44. It wasn't impressive, but it was progress. Hell Week is 72 hours of continuous training, Breck announced. No sleep, minimal food and water. You will be pushed beyond your limits. This is where we separate true Coalition material from those who merely thought they could make it. Halvor grinned. He had been first in almost every exercise. This was his chance to prove himself superior once and for all. Lissa stood near Riley in formation. Over the past weeks, they had become something like friends. Lissa still didn't understand Riley, but she respected her. Last year, half the class quit during Hell Week, Lissa whispered. Another quarter washed out from injuries. Riley just nodded. She had learned not to waste energy on talking. Hell Week began at midnight. The first trial was a 50-kilometer march through the station's training areas, which had been reconfigured into hostile terrain. Each cadet carried a 40-kilogram pack. The route included crawling through tight tunnels, climbing vertical shafts, and navigating simulated environmental hazards. Riley's pack was almost as big as her entire torso. The weight crushed down on her shoulders. But she started walking one step at a time. By hour 6, 5 cadets had dropped out. By hour 12, 3 more quit. The pack straps cut into Riley's shoulders, rubbing her skin raw even through her uniform. Her legs felt like they were filled with molten metal. But she kept walking. Halvor and the other Drachni cadets were far ahead. Their longer legs and greater strength made the march relatively easy for them. Grant walked steadily in the middle of the pack. Lissa struggled more than the warriors. Her species built for mental rather than physical pursuits, but she kept going. Riley fell further and further behind. By hour 20, she was alone at the back of the march. A training monitor followed her on a hovering platform, probably to call medical when she collapsed. Her right boot had rubbed a blister that popped hours ago. Now it was just raw meat against the inside of her boot. Every step left a small blood stain. Her shoulders had gone numb under the pack straps. She had learned to be grateful for numbness. At hour 38, she heard something snap in her left leg. Not a break, but something important giving way. Pain shot up from her shin, sharp and immediate. She stumbled and nearly fell. The training monitor moved closer. "Cadet Santos, are you injured?" Riley caught her balance and kept walking. The pain was incredible. Each step on her left leg felt like stepping on broken glass. But she had been hurt before. Pain was just information. Her leg still worked. That was all that mattered. Cadet Santos responded. "Are you injured?" "I'm fine," Riley said through gritted teeth. Continuing mission. She walked for 4 more hours on what she would later learn was a stress fracture. When they stopped for a scheduled 5-minute water break, she used the time to dig through her pack. She found a compression bandage and a rigid support brace from her medical kit. She quickly wrapped her shin as tight as she could bear and continued. The march ended at hour 42. Halvor finished first, barely winded. He collapsed onto his back at the finish point, breathing hard but smiling. Other cadets staggered across the finish line. Some were carried by medical personnel. Riley arrived last, 6 hours after Halvor. The suns had set and risen again outside the viewports. Her makeshift splint showed through her torn uniform pants. Blood had soaked through one boot. She crossed the finish line, set down her pack carefully, and stood at attention waiting for the next trial. Commander Breck walked up to her. "You're injured." "Yes, sir. You should report to medical." "Will that disqualify me from continuing Hell Week, sir?" Breck's scarred face was unreadable. "Yes, medical withdrawal means automatic failure." Riley kept her eyes forward. "Then I'll continue, sir." Breck leaned closer, speaking quietly so only she could hear. "Your leg is fractured. I can see it in the way you stand. You need treatment." "I respectfully disagree, sir. I can still complete the trials." For a long moment, Breck said nothing. Then he stepped back. "On your head be it, Santos. Next trial begins in 10 minutes. The next 40 hours blurred together into a nightmare of exhaustion and pain. Sleep deprivation made Riley's vision swim and her thoughts fuzzy. The trials kept coming. Combat simulations while exhausted. Problem-solving exercises with a mind too tired to think clearly. Survival scenarios in hostile environments. By hour 60, only 17 cadets remained. Halvor was still going strong, though even his movements had slowed. Lissa looked like a ghost, her silver markings standing out starkly against her pale, exhausted face. Grunt moved like a machine, slow but unstoppable. Riley just kept moving. Her fractured leg had gone mostly numb, which helped. Her body had moved beyond exhaustion into something else entirely. She operated on pure determination now, her mind locked onto a single thought. Finish. During one of the brief rest periods, she noticed another cadet struggling. A young Thuros named Brent had twisted his ankle during an obstacle course. He sat against a wall, his face twisted in pain. Riley limped over to him. "Let me see." "You can barely walk yourself," Brent said. "I've got experience with leg injuries now," Riley said. She examined his ankle, then pulled out her remaining compression bandage. "Here, wrap it like this." "Why are you helping me?" Brent asked as she showed him how to support the injury. "We're competing." Riley looked at him confused. "You're hurt." "I can help." "Why wouldn't I?" She moved to help 2 other struggling cadets during the rest period, sharing water and advice. Halvor watched this with an expression she couldn't read. At hour 70, disaster struck during a navigation exercise. The cadets were crossing a simulated ravine using rope bridges. Lissa, delirious with exhaustion, missed her grip and fell. She caught herself on the safety line but hung there, unable to pull herself up. The other cadets crossed the bridge and kept going. They were too exhausted to help, too focused on their own survival. Halvor looked back once, then continued forward. Riley reached Lissa and stopped. She wrapped her legs around the bridge rope and leaned down. "Grab my hand." "Leave me," Lissa gasped. "You'll fail the trial if you take too long." "Grab my hand," Riley repeated. Lissa reached up. Riley caught her wrist and pulled. With her legs hooked on the rope and her fractured leg screaming in protest, she hauled Lissa up until the Mindari could grab the bridge again. Together they crossed. "Why?" Lissa asked when they reached the other side. Riley didn't answer. She just kept moving toward the next checkpoint. The final trial began at hour 71, a 10-kilometer run through an obstacle course. Full combat gear. No breaks, only 14 cadets remained. 3 others had dropped out during the navigation trial. Riley lined up at the start with her vision tunneling from exhaustion and pain. Her splinted leg was more hindrance than help now. She could barely think straight. The starting signal sounded. Everyone ran, Riley ran too. Her form was awful, one leg dragging slightly. She fell behind immediately, but she kept running. Halvor finished first at hour 72 exactly. He collapsed across the finish line, completely spent. Medical personnel rushed to him. More cadets crossed, 12, 13. Riley was still running. She could see the finish line in the distance. Her fractured leg gave out and she fell hard onto the track. For a moment she just lay there breathing. The monitor platform hovered above her. Cadet Santos, the trial is over. You've exceeded 72 hours. You can stop now. Riley pushed herself to her hands and knees, then to her feet. She started limping forward again. Cadet Santos, you have permission to stop. She didn't stop. She limped the final kilometer on a broken leg, her entire body shaking. Other cadets who had already finished watched in stunned silence. When she finally crossed the finish line at hour 73 and 7 minutes, she walked straight to Commander Breck. "Reporting Hell Week complete, sir," she said. Then her leg finally gave out completely and she collapsed. She woke up in medical 3 hours later. Her leg was in a proper cast now. Breck stood beside her bed. "You finished Hell Week last," he said. "You exceeded the time limit. Technically, you failed." Riley's heart sank. After everything, after pushing herself to complete destruction, she had failed anyway. "However," Breck continued, "you completed every single trial. You helped other cadets when you could barely help yourself, and you kept going even after your body broke." He paused. "I'm passing you. You showed something more important than speed or strength." Riley's eyes widened. "Sir? Do you know what we were really testing, Santos?" "Not your body. Your mind, your will. Hell Week is designed to find people who don't quit when things become impossible." He looked at her with something that might have been respect. "Congratulations. You're one of only 11 cadets to pass." After Breck left, Lissa visited. She sat beside Riley's bed with her own exhaustion evident in every movement. "I've been thinking about what I sensed in you," Lissa said. "I finally understand. Most species, we have a survival instinct that makes us stop before we die, an override that forces us to quit when the damage becomes too great." She looked at Riley intensely. "You don't have that. Or if you do, you ignore it completely. You're terrifying, Riley Santos, and I'm glad you're on our side." That evening, Halvor appeared in medical. He stood at the foot of Riley's bed for a long moment before speaking. "I finished first," he said. It wasn't a boast, just a statement. "I know," Riley said. "Congratulations. I also quit helping that Thuros when he fell. I left Lissa hanging. I was so focused on winning that I forgot we're supposed to be a team." He looked uncomfortable. "You didn't do that. Even broken, you helped others." "It was the right thing to do," Riley said simply. Halvor shook his head slowly. "My father always taught me that strength is everything. But I watched you drag yourself across that finish line on a broken leg. That's a different kind of strength." He met her eyes. "I was wrong about you, human Riley. Humans might be small, but you're not weak." After he left, Riley lay back in her medical bed. Her body was wrecked. She would need weeks to fully heal. But she had survived Hell Week. She had proved something, though she wasn't entirely sure what. She just knew she was still here. And that was all that mattered. Riley had 2 weeks of recovery before returning to full training. Her leg healed in a medical regeneration chamber, and she spent the time studying coalition protocols and tactics. When she returned to training, something had changed. The other cadets no longer laughed at her. Halvor nodded respectfully when she entered the barracks. Even Commander Breck treated her differently, pushing her harder because he now believed she could take it. She had moved up to 22nd in the class rankings. Not great, but steady improvement. More importantly, she had earned something that couldn't be ranked: respect. Training had just finished for the day when alarms blared throughout the station. Riley was in the barracks with Lissa, Grunt, and Halvor when Commander Breck's voice came over the communication system. "All senior cadets report to Briefing Room 7 immediately. This is not a drill." They arrived to find Breck standing before a holographic display showing a small moon orbiting a gas giant. Other instructors and senior coalition officers crowded the room. The atmosphere was tense. 40 minutes ago, a terrorist group called the Liberation Front seized control of Summit Station on the moon of Tellus 3, Breck announced. They're holding the Coalition Diplomatic Summit hostage. 28 delegates from across the galaxy, including Ambassador Threll's daughter. The holographic display shifted to show Summit Station, a diplomatic complex built into the moon's surface. Riley studied the layout carefully, a habit she had developed during tactical training. The terrorists have fortified positions and anti-aircraft defenses. They've threatened to execute hostages if any military ships approach within weapons range. Breck's expression was grim. We've been authorized to prepare a rescue advisory team. Command wants fresh tactical perspectives. You 10 cadets represent the top scorers in tactical analysis. You'll review the situation and provide recommendations. Riley wasn't in the top 10, but Breck had included her anyway. She suspected why. For the next 3 hours, the cadets studied the station layout, terrorist positions, and defensive systems. Halvor suggested a direct assault using stealth ships. Lissa proposed using her Mindari abilities to psychically confuse the terrorists. Grunt outlined a siege approach. Riley said nothing. She just studied the holographic map, zooming in on different sections, cross-referencing with the station's technical specifications that she pulled up on a side screen. Santos, you've been quiet, Breck said. Analysis? Riley stood and walked to the holographic display. She pointed to a section of the station that showed as blank space on the tactical map. There's a maintenance ventilation system here, she said. It's not on the tactical map because it's not relevant for most operations. But according to the technical specs, these ducts run throughout the entire facility. She traced the duct path with her finger, the hologram following her movement. They connect to every major room, including the hostage chamber. The ducts are only 40 centimeters wide in most places. Halvor frowned. That's too small. No one could fit through there. Most species couldn't, Riley agreed. She looked at Breck. But a human could. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at the ventilation path Riley had highlighted. You're suggesting infiltration through the duct system? One of the senior officers asked. It's not on their security sensors, Riley explained. The ducts are too small for anyone they'd expect. Someone could enter through an external maintenance port here. She pointed. Move through the system to reach the hostage location. Maybe even sabotage their defenses from inside. Another officer shook his head. It's too dangerous. The person would be alone in tight spaces with no backup. If they're discovered, they're dead. No room to fight in those ducts. It's still an option, Riley said quietly. Breck studied her for a long moment. Are you volunteering, Santos? Riley met his gaze. If it helps save the hostages, yes, sir. You're still a cadet. Untested in real combat situations, I know, sir. But I'm the only one here small enough to access that route. And I don't quit when things get difficult. Lissa stepped forward. Commander, I need to speak. She looked at Riley, then at Breck. I've been studying Riley's psychology since we met. My empathic abilities let me sense things others don't. She paused. Riley doesn't process danger the same way we do. When I sense fear in others, it's a stopping mechanism. But in her, I sense determination that overrides everything else. She won't panic in those ducts. She won't freeze. She'll just keep going forward. Grant spoke up next, surprising everyone. He rarely offered opinions. I have fought Riley many times in training. She loses, but she gets up. Every time. He looked at Breck. She will not stop. This is useful for a mission like this. Halvor was the last to speak. If Santos says she can do it, I believe her. She's proven herself. Breck looked at his fellow officers. They had a quick, quiet discussion. Finally, Breck turned back to Riley. The mission is extremely dangerous. You could die in multiple ways. Suffocation in the ducts, discovery and execution by terrorists, equipment failure. Even if everything goes perfectly, you'll be crawling through tight, dark spaces for hours with no support. I understand, sir. Why would you volunteer for this? Riley thought about the question. Because those people need help, and I can help them. That's enough reason. Breck nodded slowly. You'll need specialized equipment. We have 4 hours before the mission window opens. Get to the preparation bay. We'll brief you on the full plan there. As Riley left the briefing room, Lissa caught up with her in the corridor. Riley, I need you to understand something, Lissa said urgently. I sense that you're not afraid, but you should be. This mission could kill you. I know, Riley said calmly. Then why aren't you scared? Riley stopped walking and considered the question carefully. I am scared, but being scared doesn't change what needs to happen. Those people are in danger. I can help, so I will. That's what I don't understand, Lissa said. Most people, fear stops them. But fear doesn't stop you. Fear is just information, Riley replied. It tells me the mission is dangerous. I already knew that. It doesn't tell me not to go. Lysa shook her head in wonder. Your species is very strange, Riley Santos. In the preparation bay, Riley was fitted with specialized equipment. A lightweight environmental suit that could fit through the narrow ducts. A compact toolkit, a small cutting torch, a communication device that might not work through all the metal, emergency oxygen for 6 hours, a compact pistol with non-lethal rounds, though in those tight ducts she'd have no room to use it. The equipment specialist, a nervous Mindari engineer, kept double-checking everything. Are you sure about this? The engineer asked. I've reviewed the duct specifications. You'll have to crawl for over 3 kilometers through spaces barely wider than your body. Some sections angle vertically. If you panic, if you freeze up, there's no rescue possible. I won't panic, Riley said. The engineer looked doubtful but continued the equipment check. Commander Breck arrived with the final mission briefing. A holographic map showed her route through the duct system. You'll enter here at the external port. The terrorists' sensors don't monitor the ventilation system. You'll navigate through the main ducts to reach the central complex. Once there, your primary objective is reaching the hostage chamber and finding a way to extract them. Secondary objectives? Riley asked. If possible, sabotage their defensive systems. Power generators, communication arrays, whatever you can reach. Every system you disable improves our chances of a successful assault. Breck met her eyes. But Riley, if it's a choice between sabotage and your survival, choose survival. You're a cadet, not a suicide volunteer. Understood, sir. Breck hesitated, then spoke more quietly. I've been reviewing human history. Your species has done things that seemed impossible, crossed impossible distances, survived impossible conditions, fought impossible battles. He paused. But knowing when to retreat is also important. Promise me you'll extract if the situation becomes truly hopeless. Riley wanted to promise, but she also knew herself. If there was even a chance of saving those hostages, she wouldn't retreat. Breck seemed to read this in her expression. Just try to come back alive, he said finally. You've surprised me more than any cadet I've trained. I'd like to see what you become with full training. An hour later, Riley stood in the deployment bay. A stealth ship would drop her at the moon's surface near the maintenance port. After that, she was on her own. Halvor, Lysa, and Grant came to see her off. Halvor actually looked worried. If you die doing this, I'm going to be very angry at you, Halvor said. Riley smiled slightly. I'll try not to die then. How can you be so calm? Lysa asked. I can sense your fear now. It's there, but it's like it's behind a wall in your mind. The fear isn't wrong, Riley said. This is dangerous. But those people are depending on me, so I'll do what needs doing. Grant stepped forward and did something unexpected. He placed one massive hand on Riley's shoulder. For his species, it was a gesture of deep respect. You are small, Grant said, but you have the largest spirit of anyone I have met. Good hunting, Riley Santos. The stealth ship's pilot called for departure. Riley climbed aboard, her specialized equipment secured to her small frame. As the ship lifted off and headed toward the moon, she looked back at the station one last time. She was scared. Terrified, actually. The mission ahead was nearly impossible. She might die in those ducts. She might fail and watch hostages die. Everything could go wrong. But someone had to try. And she was the only one who could fit through those ducts. So she would go. She would crawl through kilometers of darkness. She would face armed terrorists with nothing but determination and a small toolkit. Because that's what humans did. When something was impossible, when something needed doing, when everyone else said it couldn't be done, humans tried anyway. Riley Santos settled into her seat as the ship approached the moon. She reviewed the duct map one more time, memorizing every turn and junction. Then she closed her eyes and centered herself. In a few minutes, the real test would begin. Not a test of strength or speed, but of pure stubborn will. She had never quit anything in her life. She wasn't about to start now. The stealth ship descended through the moon's thin atmosphere without a sound. Riley checked her equipment one final time as they approached the landing zone. Her hands were steady. Her breathing was controlled. The fear was still there, locked behind that wall in her mind that Lysa had sensed. The ship touched down in a crater 3 kilometers from Summit Station. Riley climbed out onto the gray lunar surface. The external maintenance port was a 20-minute walk across rough terrain. "We'll hold position here," the pilot said through her helmet comm. "If you need emergency extraction, signal and we'll come in fast. But that will alert the terrorists." "Understood," Riley said. She started walking. The moon's gravity was lighter than she was used to, making each step a careful bounce. She crossed the crater rim and headed toward the coordinates Breek had provided. The station was built into the side of a mountain, mostly underground. Only communication arrays and defensive weapons showed above the surface. She found the maintenance port exactly where the blueprints indicated, a simple airlock hatch marked with warning symbols. She opened it manually, climbed inside, and sealed it behind her. The airlock cycled, and she entered the maintenance corridor. The ventilation duct entrance was 3 meters down the corridor. Riley removed the access panel and stared into the dark square opening. 40 centimeters wide, barely enough room for her body. She would have to crawl on her stomach the entire way. She activated her helmet light and pulled herself into the duct. Immediately, the walls pressed close on all sides. Her shoulders scraped metal. She could extend her arms forward but couldn't bring them back to her sides. The only way to move was to pull with her fingers and push with her toes, inching forward like a worm. The first 100 meters were horizontal. Riley focused on breathing slowly and moving steadily. The duct air was stale and smelled like metal and dust. Her helmet light showed only a few meters ahead before the duct curved away into darkness. After 10 minutes of crawling, she reached her first junction. The map in her helmet display showed she needed to go up. The duct angled vertically, climbing toward the station's main level. Riley positioned herself at the base of the vertical section and started climbing. She braced her back against one wall and her feet against the other, then pushed upward. Her equipment scraped against the metal with sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the enclosed space. She climbed 20 meters straight up. Her legs burned. Her back ached. But she kept pushing. At the top, the duct leveled out again and she could return to crawling. She had been in the ducts for 30 minutes when her communication device crackled. "Santos, this is command. Status check." "On schedule," Riley whispered. Talking in the ducts felt wrong, like her voice might alert someone. "Approximately 1 kilometer into the duct system. No contacts. Copy that. Terrorist communications indicate they're preparing to execute the first hostage in 90 minutes if their demands aren't met. Whatever you're going to do, do it fast." Riley's jaw tightened. She started crawling faster, ignoring the pain in her knees and elbows as they scraped against metal. The duct branched and twisted. She followed her map, taking turns that led deeper into the facility. She was 2 kilometers in when disaster struck. The duct narrowed. According to the blueprints, it should have stayed at 40 centimeters. But the actual duct squeezed down to barely 35 centimeters in a section where the builders had apparently deviated from the plans. Riley wedged into the narrow section and immediately got stuck. The walls pressed against her chest and back. She couldn't move forward or backward. Panic fluttered at the edge of her mind. She stopped moving and forced herself to breathe slowly. Panicking would make her muscles tense, making her bigger, making the situation worse. She needed to stay calm. She exhaled completely, emptying her lungs. Her chest compressed slightly. She pulled with her fingers and gained 1 centimeter. Another breath out. Another pull. Another centimeter. It took 15 agonizing minutes to work through that 5-meter section. When the duct widened again, Riley allowed herself 30 seconds to just breathe and let her racing heart slow down. Then she kept going. At the 2.5-kilometer mark, she reached a vent that looked down into the station's power control room. She could see 2 terrorists below, armed with energy rifles. The room was filled with equipment that fed power to the entire facility. Riley carefully removed her cutting torch from her toolkit. She couldn't go down there and fight them, but she could access the power conduits that ran through the ducts near her position. She found the main power line and studied it. Cutting it completely would plunge the entire station into darkness, but emergency systems would kick in within seconds. Instead, she used her torch to damage the line carefully, creating an intermittent fault. The lights below flickered. The terrorists looked around in confusion. Riley moved on before they could investigate. She had just completed her first sabotage. The next 30 minutes were a nightmare of crawling. Her knees were bleeding inside her suit. Her shoulders were raw, but she reached the section of ducts above the main complex. According to her map, she was directly above the hostage chamber. She found a vent and looked down carefully. 28 hostages sat on the floor in the center of a large room. They were bound and guarded by 6 terrorists. Ambassador Threll's daughter, a young Drachni female, sat with the others. She looked terrified. The room had only one entrance. The terrorists had positioned themselves perfectly to defend it. Any rescue attempt would result in hostage deaths, but no one was watching the ceiling. Riley studied the vent cover. It was secured with standard bolts from the inside. If she could get down there, she could unbolt it. But that would make noise. The terrorists would hear. She needed a distraction. Riley backed away from the vent and crawled to another section of duct. She had seen a communication relay junction on her map. If she could access it, she might be able to manipulate the station's systems. She found the junction and carefully opened an access panel. Inside was a mess of data lines and routing equipment. Riley had studied basic systems engineering, but this was beyond her training. She made her best guess and started disconnecting things. Alarms began blaring throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed. The terrorists in the hostage chamber shouted to each other in confusion. Riley heard running footsteps as some of them left to investigate. She crawled back to the vent above the hostage chamber. Only 3 guards remained now, and they were distracted by the alarms. Riley worked quickly and quietly to unbolt the vent cover. Her hands shook slightly. This was the critical moment. If the guards looked up now, she was dead, and the hostages would likely die too. The last bolt came free. She caught the vent cover before it could fall and make noise. She set it aside in the duct. Below her, the 3 terrorist guards stood facing the door, weapons ready. They expected an attack from that direction. Riley pulled out her compact pistol and dropped silently through the vent opening. She landed on her feet behind the guards. Before they could turn, she fired 3 times. The non-lethal rounds hit each guard in rapid succession. They collapsed, stunned. The hostages stared at her in shock. Riley quickly moved to Ambassador Threll's daughter and started cutting her bonds with her torch. "Who are you?" the young Drachni whispered. "Cadet Riley Santos, Coalition Academy. I'm getting you out of here." Riley moved to the next hostage, cutting their bonds. "Can any of you fight?" Several hostages nodded. She handed them the unconscious guards' weapons. "The ventilation duct," Riley said, pointing up. "Too small for most of you. We need another way out." An older Mindari diplomat spoke up. "There's a service corridor. It connects to the external landing bays. But it will be guarded." "How many guards?" "I don't know. But the terrorist leader Scar has at least 20 soldiers in this facility." Riley's mind raced. She had sabotaged their power and alarms. She had freed the hostages, but getting them out would require fighting through armed terrorists. She looked at the freed hostages. They were diplomats, not soldiers. Most couldn't fight. A new voice crackled in her helmet. "Santos, this is Commander Breck. We detected your sabotage. What's your status?" "Hostages freed, but we're trapped. Too many hostiles between us and extraction. Hold position. We're sending in the assault team. They'll hit the main entrance in 5 minutes. "Negative," Riley said. "The terrorists will execute hostages if they detect an assault. They probably have deadman switches." Silence on the line. Then Breck spoke grimly. "Then what's your plan?" Riley looked at the hostages, at the weapons she had taken from the guards, at the duct system she knew intimately now. "I'm going to give them a bigger problem to worry about," she said. Before Breck could respond, Riley turned to the armed hostages. "Get everyone into that service corridor. Move as quietly as possible toward the landing bays. I'll create a distraction." Ambassador Threll's daughter grabbed Riley's arm. "You can't face them alone." "There are too many." Riley smiled grimly. "I don't need to beat them. I just need to make them think they're under attack from everywhere at once." She climbed back into the duct before anyone could argue. Her body screamed in protest. She had been crawling for hours. She was exhausted and injured. But the hostages were depending on her. Riley navigated through the duct system to the terrorist command center. She looked down through a vent and saw Scar, the leader, barking orders. He was a massive Thuros with battle scars covering his armored hide. She used her torch to cut through a data line near his position. Sparks showered down. Scar roared in surprise. Riley moved to the next duct junction and caused another systems failure. Then another. She appeared in vents throughout the facility, sabotaging systems, creating chaos. The terrorists thought they were under attack from multiple points. They fired at shadows and movements they couldn't identify. Riley pushed herself harder than she ever had before. She crawled through ducts at speeds that tore her suit and bloodied her further. She ignored pain. She ignored exhaustion. She just kept moving, kept sabotaging, kept the terrorists confused and scattered. Her communication device crackled. "Riley, the hostages are at the landing bay." "But it's sealed. They need help." Riley checked her map. The landing bay control room was on the far side of the facility. She had maybe 5 minutes before the terrorists realized the hostages were gone and converged on that location. She crawled faster than she thought possible. Her muscles were beyond exhaustion. She operated on pure will now. She reached the control room duct and looked down. 2 guards stood at the controls. She dropped through the vent and fired before they could react. At the control panel, she frantically worked to open the landing bay doors. An alarm began blaring. Footsteps thundered in the corridor outside. The terrorists were coming. The bay doors started opening. Through the window, Riley could see the hostages rushing onto a rescue ship. The control room door burst open. Scar stood there with 5 armed soldiers. He saw Riley and roared in rage. "The human! Kill her!" Riley dove behind the control panel as energy blasts tore through the room. She was trapped. No escape, no backup. But the hostages were safe. That was all that mattered. She keyed her communication device one last time. "Hostages are clear. Landing bay is hot. I'm pinned down." Then she took the weapons from the unconscious guards and prepared to make her last stand against impossible odds. Just like a honey badger, she would go down fighting. Energy blasts burned the air above Riley's head as she crouched behind the control panel. The metal console provided cover, but it wouldn't last long under sustained fire. Scar and his soldiers advanced into the room, their weapons blazing. Riley checked her stolen weapon. Half charge remaining. She was bleeding from multiple cuts and scrapes. Her body was pushed far beyond its limits. But she had one advantage. The terrorists thought they were fighting a trained soldier, someone who would act predictably. She wasn't predictable. She was desperate and stubborn, and that made her dangerous in ways they couldn't anticipate. She rolled out from behind the console, firing low. Her shots hit one terrorist in the legs. He went down. She scrambled to a different position before return fire could find her. The room was filled with equipment and computer banks, creating a maze of cover. Scar roared orders. "Spread out! Flush her out!" They were making a mistake. They were treating this like a normal combat situation. But Riley had spent hours crawling through the ducts. She knew this facility now. She knew every vent, every access point, every alternate route. She fired twice more, dropped her empty weapon, and dove into a maintenance access hatch. The opening was too small for the thorough soldiers. They fired after her, but she was already crawling through the narrow passage. She emerged in the corridor outside the control room, behind the terrorists. They were still focused on the room she had left. Riley grabbed a fire suppression canister from the wall, activated it, and threw it into the control room. Foam exploded everywhere, blinding everyone. She ran. Her legs barely worked. Each step was agony. But she ran anyway. Scar's voice echoed behind her. "After her! Don't let the human escape!" Riley turned a corner and nearly collided with 3 more terrorists. They were just as surprised as she was. She didn't have a weapon. She didn't have time to think. She just reacted. She ducked under the first one's grab and swept his legs. As he fell, she took his weapon and fired point blank at the second. The third terrorist raised his rifle, but Riley was already moving. She rolled under his shot and came up inside his reach. A strike to his knee joint, then she took his weapon as he fell. 3 seconds. 3 opponents down. Riley didn't stop to think about what she had just done. She kept running. Her communication device crackled. "Riley, this is Brick. The assault team is breaching now." "Where are you?" "East Wing, Section 12, Riley gasped. "Multiple hostiles pursuing. Get to the main bay. We'll cover your extraction." Riley changed direction, heading toward the main bay. Behind her, she heard Scar rallying his remaining forces. They were converging on her position. She burst through a doorway and found herself in a large cargo bay. The assault team was breaching through the main entrance on the far side. She could see Halvor leading the charge, his massive form unmistakable even in combat armor. But between Riley and rescue stood Scar and his last 8 soldiers. They formed a line, weapons raised. "End of the run, little human," Scar growled. "You've caused more damage than any soldier should. But you're about to learn what happens when you bare your teeth at real warriors." Riley's weapon was empty. She had no cover. She was exhausted, injured, and alone. By any reasonable measure, she should surrender. But Riley Santos had never been reasonable. "I'm a human," she said, standing straight despite her exhaustion. "We don't know when to quit." "That's not a weakness. It's what makes us dangerous," she charged. The terrorists hesitated for just a moment, shocked that this tiny, wounded human was attacking them head-on. That moment was all the assault team needed. Halvor and his squad hit the terrorist line from behind. The cargo bay erupted into chaos. Riley dove and rolled, avoiding weapons fire. She grabbed a dropped rifle and fired from ground level, hitting 2 terrorists who weren't expecting an attack from below. The fight was over in seconds. The assault team overwhelmed the terrorists with professional efficiency. Scar himself went down under Grant's massive fists. Then Halvor was there, pulling Riley to her feet. "Are you insane? You charged them alone. Worked, didn't it?" Riley said. Her legs gave out and Halvor caught her. "You terrifying, stubborn, impossible human," Halvor said, but he was smiling. He lifted her easily and carried her toward the extraction ship. Riley's last conscious thought before exhaustion claimed her was that she had done it. The hostages were safe. The mission was complete. She had kept going until there was nothing left to give. Riley woke up 3 days later in the station's medical center. Her body was wrapped in regeneration bandages. Every centimeter of her hurt, but it was the good kind of hurt that meant she was alive and healing. Commander Breck stood beside her bed when she opened her eyes. "Welcome back, Santos," he said. "You've been unconscious for 72 hours. The doctor said your body basically shut down from exhaustion and injury. You pushed yourself to complete physiological failure." "Did everyone make it?" Riley asked immediately. "The hostages? All 28 hostages survived without injury. Thanks to you." Breck sat down in a chair. "I need to tell you something. While you were unconscious, your mission became very public. The hostages told their story. The assault team told theirs. And now the entire coalition is talking about the human cadet who crawled through impossible spaces, sabotaged a terrorist operation, and saved everyone." Riley felt uncomfortable with the attention. "I just did what needed doing. I know. That's what makes you remarkable." Breck pulled up a data screen. "I've spent the last 3 days studying human history more deeply. Do you know what I found? Your species used to hunt by chasing prey for days. Not fast chases. Slow, relentless pursuit. You would follow an animal until it collapsed from exhaustion. It's called persistence hunting. I learned about that in school," Riley said. "Your entire species evolved to just keep going. Other predators are faster, stronger. But humans? You just don't stop, ever." Breck looked at her intently. "That's what the galaxy saw in your mission. Not strength. Not speed. Absolute, unbreakable determination. You were injured, exhausted, trapped, and you just kept fighting. The terrorists had every advantage except one. They could be stopped. You couldn't." Over the next week, as Riley recovered, visitors came constantly. Ambassador Threll and his daughter came to thank her personally. The daughter, whose name was Sarah, hugged Riley carefully and cried. "You saved my life," Sarah said. "I thought we were all going to die." Then this tiny human appeared and refused to let it happen. Lisa visited every day. "I've been analyzing what I sensed from you during the mission," she said. "I was linked to the command channel. I felt your mind the whole time. Riley, you were terrified, but the fear never stopped you from moving forward. I've never encountered a psychology like that in any species." Grant brought her flowers, which was apparently a significant gesture in Thoreau's culture. "You have taught me something," he said. "I always believed strength was about size and power. But watching you fight, watching you refuse to surrender, I learned that strength has many forms. You are small, Riley Santos, but you are mighty." Halvor visited last. He sat beside her bed with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Humility. "I mocked you when you arrived," he said. "I called humans weak. I thought your small size meant you couldn't be a warrior." He shook his head. "I was a fool. You're the strongest person I've met. Not physically. But here," he tapped his chest, "where it really matters. You helped rescue me," Riley pointed out. "The assault team saved me at the end. After you saved everyone else. After you did the impossible alone." Halvor met her eyes. "My people have a saying now. It's spreading through the Drachni military. Never underestimate a species that doesn't quit. They're talking about humans. About you." 2 weeks after the mission, Riley was cleared to return to training. The moment she entered the training hall, all activity stopped. Every cadet, every instructor, everyone present turned to look at her. Then as one, they saluted. Riley stood frozen, not sure how to respond. Commander Breck approached her. "At attention," he commanded. The entire hall snapped to attention. "Cadets, you are looking at Cadet First Class Riley Santos. She has been promoted 2 ranks for exceptional valor in combat. She has been awarded the Coalition Star for saving 28 lives, and she has been personally commended by the Coalition Council." Breck turned to Riley and did something unprecedented. He saluted her. A commander saluting a cadet. "More importantly," Breck continued, "she has shown us all what true courage looks like. It's not the absence of fear. It's moving forward despite fear. It's refusing to quit when every reasonable person would. It's being small in a galaxy of giants and standing tall anyway." The hall erupted in applause. Not polite applause. Genuine, thunderous appreciation. Riley felt tears in her eyes. She had come to this station expecting to be mocked and dismissed. She had been prepared to prove herself slowly over time. She had never expected this. Training resumed, but everything was different now. Cadets asked her for advice. Instructors used her mission as a case study. She was no longer the human who didn't belong. She was Riley Santos, the cadet who saved the diplomatic summit. 3 months later, at graduation, Riley stood with the 10 cadets who had survived the full program. She had finished 7th in her class. Not first, but remarkably high considering where she had started. Halvor finished first, as expected. But during his speech as the top graduate, he said something that made Riley smile. "I came here believing I knew what strength was," Halvor said. "I was wrong. True strength isn't about being the biggest or the strongest. It's about never giving up. It's about protecting others even at cost to yourself. It's about facing impossible odds and trying anyway." He looked directly at Riley. "I learned that from a human who stands half my height and has twice my courage." After the ceremony, Command offered Riley her choice of assignments. She could join any unit in the Coalition. Everyone wanted the human who didn't quit. But there was another offer, delivered personally by a senior Coalition general. "We're forming a new unit," the general explained, "for missions that seem impossible. Hostage rescue, deep infiltration, situations where normal tactics fail. We need soldiers who don't know how to quit. We need more like you." "Other humans?" Riley asked. "We're recruiting from Earth now. Your species has a talent the galaxy didn't know it needed." The general paused. "We're calling it the Santos Protocol, named after you, because you showed us that sometimes the mission requires someone who simply refuses to fail." Riley accepted the position. Over the next year, she helped train the first human special operations unit in the Coalition. They were small compared to other species, not as strong, not as fast, but they had something else. They didn't quit, ever. The Santos Protocol teams became legendary. When hostages needed rescue from impossible locations, when missions required someone to push beyond normal limits, when the situation seemed hopeless, Command sent humans. And the humans got it done. 2 years after Riley's graduation, she returned to the academy as an instructor. She walked into the barracks where new human cadets were arriving, looking nervous and overwhelmed. They were small in a station built for giants. They would be mocked and underestimated. They would struggle in training designed for larger species. But Riley looked at them and smiled, because she knew what they were capable of. She knew what humans could do when they refused to accept defeat. "Welcome to the Coalition Academy," she told them. "They're going to laugh at you. They're going to call you weak. They're going to bet on when you'll quit." She paused, meeting each of their eyes. "Prove them wrong. Not because you're stronger or faster, but because you're human. And humans don't quit. When the galaxy expects you to break, you keep going. When the mission seems impossible, you try anyway. That's not weakness. That's the most dangerous weapon the galaxy has ever seen." One young cadet raised his hand. "What if we can't do it? What if we really aren't strong enough?" Riley remembered her first days here. The pain, the exhaustion, the constant voice in her head telling her to quit, and her own voice, quieter but more stubborn, saying just one more step. "You're strong enough," she said firmly. "Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but if you refuse to quit, if you keep trying, you'll get there. That's what makes us different. We're not honey badgers because we're fearless. We're honey badgers because when we bare our teeth, we never let go." The cadet stood a little straighter. Riley smiled. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Don't laugh at humans. Don't dismiss them because they're small. Because humans, when pushed, when protecting something that matters, when facing impossible odds, reveal what true strength really is, the strength to never ever quit. And that made them the most terrifying species in the galaxy.